that you know how to navigate around Blender, it's time to take a look at the tools that we have. So over here to the left are our basic tools. Now I'm going to go through each of these tools. The first one that we have is one that is selected by default, and it's the select box tool. And that allows you to select your objects within the viewport here. So just left click and drag over any object that you want to select them. So left click, drag, release. If you want to select multiple objects, you could just left click and drag over multiple objects. Alternatively, you could select one object, then hold down the shift key on the keyboard and left click on each of the other objects that you want to select. Now, if you notice to the lower right of this very tool here, you'll see a small arrow right here. And that tells us that there are other tools hidden within this one tool. And to access those tools, just left click and hold down your mouse button to view the other tools that are hidden within that tool. So here we can see we have multiple selects. The second select that we have is a circle select. So let me select that. Let me left click to deselect all of my objects here. Now the circle select allows us to select our objects as if we were using a paintbrush. So you just left click and drag over the areas that you want to select, or the objects that you want to select, and it will select those objects. So let me left click to deselect those and show you how this works again. So just left click and drag as if you're painting over the object to select them. All right, so let me deselect that and let me left click this to hold it down again. The next one that we have is the select lasso. So let me select that one. And this works like, well, a lasso. You just left click and go over the areas that you want to select or the objects that you want to select, release to select that particular object. So these are just different ways to select your objects. Now there's another tool here that is called the tweak tool. What this does is it allows you to select and move your objects. Once you left click to select, you can move your mouse and it will grab that object and move it. Now let me undo that by pressing Ctrl and Z to position back my objects where they were. Now the second tool that we have here is the 3D cursor tool. Let me move this object here out of the way. If you look here, you can see we have a red and white circle with an arrow in between it, and that is the 3D cursor. Now what this tool does is wherever it's positioned or it's located within the 3D viewport here, that's where objects are added to the scene. So for example, if I should come here and press add mesh and click on cube, it will be added right where that 3D cursor is. Let me press the delete button to delete that, and let me go to that particular tool there, and I'm just going to click over here and show you how it works. So with the 3D cursor over here, if I should add mesh cube, it will be added wherever the 3D cursor is. So you could just left click, add mesh cube. So now that you understand how that works, yeah, wherever you want to add a particular object, just position your 3D cursor there. Now to position your 3D cursor within the center here, or to reset the 3D cursor, just simply hold down the shift key and the C key on your keyboard to reset it. Now you can also tell objects to go to where the 3D cursor is. So for example, if I wanted this object to go, by the way, make sure that when you don't want to move the cursor, you select a different tool. Okay, so let me press shift and C to reset that. Let me just click on a different tool. Yeah, so if you wanted to move this cube to where this 3D cursor is, you could tell it. So with that object selected, if you press shift and S, that will bring up a pie menu. And if you look here at the top, you'll see selection to cursor. So selection being whatever you have selected in the viewport here, and it's telling it to go to the cursor. So if I should left click on that, it will move to the cursor there. So we can do that with pretty much any object. All right, like so. Let me move those out. Let me delete those cubes that we don't want and move on to our third tool. Now the third tool is the move tool. What this allows us to do is to move our objects. So if I should left click on my object, notice that we see 3 different arrows going into 3 different directions. Now, these directions represent the X, Y, and Z axes. And notice that they are color coded as well. So the red arrow represents the X axis, the green arrow represents the Y axis, and the blue arrow represents the Z axis. So to move the object on either of these axes, just left click on the arrow that you want and just drag your mouse to move. All right, so I'm moving on the X axis, and can select this one to move on the Y, and select this one to move on the Z. Let me just undo that. Control Z to undo that. Now the tool underneath that is the rotate tool. So if I should select that, we see we still have our 3 different colors here, but now it's transformed into a circle to indicate that we are able to rotate. So to rotate on either of the axes, just select the one that you want, left click and drag. So I'm dragging the green one, so we know that it's rotating on the Y, and we can grab the red one to rotate on the X, and of course the Z axis are the Z axis, which is a blue circle. Let me undo that. Control Z. And the next tool is the scale tool. So if I wanted to scale on the X, just select this one, left click and drag. Right. If I wanted to scale on the Y, left click and drag. And if I wanted to scale on the Z axis or the Z axis, just left click and drag the blue one here. And if you wanted to scale uniformly, just left click within the center point here, just left click and hold on your mouse and drag it out. Well, I didn't do that right, but let me zoom in here and left click and drag like so to scale it uniformly. There are shortcut keys to each of these tools. So to move, the shortcut key is G, and G represents grab. So when you're moving, you're actually grabbing your object. So if I should select my my cube here and press the G key on my keyboard and I move my mouse, I'm able to grab the object and move it wherever I want. So if I wanted to position it here, I would just left click. If I didn't want it to go there while I'm moving, I would just right click to release it. Okay, so left click to position it where you want it to go, or you right click to release. Okay, let me Control Z and undo that. And for rotate, the shortcut key is R. So once I press that, I'm able to rotate. And there's 2 forms of rotation. So if I press my R key again, I'm able to rotate this more fluently, like so. So let me just right click to release that. And for the scale tool, the shortcut key is S. So if I press the S on my keyboard, I'm able to scale. All right. Now the shortcut keys, if you do forget, if you were to left click on the edge of any of these tools, hold on your left click and drag out, right, like so, you can see the names of the tools. Also, if you should hover over any of the tools, you would see a description of that tool, and at the end you would see the shortcut key for that tool. All right, so for this one we can see that it's the G key, and if I hover over the rotate, we can see that it's R, and the S is, and the scale is the S. Now the next tool is the transform tool. What this tool does is it combines the scale, rotate, and move into one, so that we don't have to select the tools individually. So as we can see here, we have the circle for the rotation, these cubes for the scale, and the arrows for the move. So we can move, we can scale by selecting the particular icons, and we can rotate. So let me undo that all the way back here. Now the next tool is the annotate tool, and this allows you to just write on your screen. So if I select that, I'm able to write on my screen here, like so. All right, so you can add notes to your scene if you wanted to. If you look over here to the right, you will see an arrow that is pointing towards the left. That's a very small arrow. If you should left click and drag that out, you'll be presented with another menu. Alternatively, if you press the N key, right, it will hide and unhide that menu. And to hide and unhide the tools menu, you would select the T key. So that's T to hide it and T to unhide it. So for the left side, T; for the right side, N. Okay, this actually shows me that I'm in the properties of the annotate tool. And make sure that you select, we have different options here. Make sure that you select the tools from this option here, and we can see the color is blue. Now if we should left click on that, we can actually left click here within the color wheel here to change the color to whatever we want. So I'm just going to hide that by pressing N. And to delete or erase your writing here, notice that we also have an arrow underneath this tool here. So that indicates that we have more options, more tools. So if I should left click and hold that down, we can just go all the way down to the eraser tool. And with that selected, I'm just left click and drag over the areas that I want to erase. Now I'm going to show you one more thing. If I have something written here and I go to the eraser tool, notice that we have this circle that comes around like a brush. If you want to decrease the size of that brush, you could just move your scroll wheel, your middle mouse wheel up. And if I wanted to increase it, you just move your middle mouse wheel back or forward, back, forward to decrease and back to increase. And then you just go over the area that you want to erase. Now, there's also a shortcut for that. So the shortcut is the D key. So if you hold down the D key and you left click and drag, you're able to write. And with the D key held down, if you wanted to erase, you just right click to erase. All right, so that's the shortcut. We're almost done with the tools. The next tool is the measure tool, and this allows us to take measurements or measure our objects. So let me just zoom in here and show you how this works. So left click and drag to create a line or a ruler that you're able to measure your object. And notice that you see M beside the values right there. That's indicating that our measurements is meters. We're measuring within meters. Okay. If we wanted to snap it onto our object here, just hold down the Control key and move your mouse over the edge of the object, and we see a small circle. And if we release, it would be snapped onto that. So I'm just going to release the Control key. And if you wanted to move any part of that, just move to any of the edges until you see a four-way arrow, and just left click and drag to move the ruler. Now I'm going to snap this onto the edge here. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and just move it down here so that we know that this cube is 2 meters tall. So if you wanted to take your measurements, you would use this tool. Now you can change from meters to centimeters to inches, but we won't get into that for this tutorial. If you should left click and drag anywhere else, you would just create more and more rulers. So if you don't want to use a ruler, make sure that you select another tool. That would just actually hide the ruler tool. But when you go back to the measure tool, I'm calling it ruler tool, but it's called measure. When you go back to the measure tool, you will see the measurements that you have. So to delete them, you just make sure that you position your cursor over the line, select it, left click to select it, and just press delete twice to delete it. So left click, delete, left click, delete, delete, and left click, delete, delete. Now one more thing with the measure tool, let me just draw one here. You can measure at an angle. So if you come anywhere in between the 2 points that make up the measurements and left click and drag, you see that you are able to bend that line like so. And now the measurement is in degrees. So that's pretty cool. And we can check that this is accurate. So if I should left click here, hold on my Control key, let me go here and snap it on. And I'm going to move this here, snap this, hold on my Control key and snap this here. We can then see that this measurement is at a 90-degree angle. So, and we know that this is definitely a 90 degrees angle. So the measurement is indeed correct. Let me move on to the final tool, which is the add cube tool. And this just allows you to add a cube to the scene in a different way. So to add the cube from using this tool, just left click and drag out, right? If you wanted a uniform cube, you just hold on the Shift key, right, to get a more uniform cube. Then when you release, right, it'll go back to normal like that. So left click to release, and then you move your mouse up or down, right, whichever direction you want to go. Then left click to create your cube. Now there are other tools hidden, such as the cone, the cylinder, and other tools, but there's no need to use this, because if you wanted to add other objects to the scene, which we'll get into in another video, you just go to add and mesh, and then you're able to add those same tools that we have right here. That's it for the tools, and these are just the basic tools that you'll pretty much be, well, you'll be using most of these, maybe not all.